This is the current US national debt, almost $40 trillion. It's so massive that the moment a baby is born in the US, he is already over $115,000 in debt. But how is it possible for a country which is widely considered as the global superpower and the biggest national economy in the world to have the largest national debt in human history? Well, it's all because of a system that has been doing exactly what it was designed to do. This is the story of how the United States built the largest pile of debt in human history by choosing short-term relief over long-term stability, why it kept growing even when the economy was strong, and why, despite everything you've been told, paying it off was never the plan. To understand debt, we have to start with a simple question. What is national debt really? The national debt is the total amount of money the US government has borrowed over time to cover the difference between what it spends and what it collects in taxes. That difference is called the deficit. Deficits happen every year. Debt is what happens when they accumulate. But here's the part that almost always gets left out. Every dollar of US government debt is also someone else's asset. According to the US Treasury's debt to penny data, over 2/3 of the debt is held by investors and institutions that rely on it as a safe store of value. So when people say the debt is too high, what they're really saying is that the system contains way too many promises, and breaking those promises would collapse the whole system. This is why debt is not just an accounting problem. It's a political, financial, and a structural problem. And it's also why the United States didn't stumble into trillions worth of debt. It basically started there. When the American Revolution ended, the new United States was bankrupt. The Continental Congress had borrowed heavily to fund the war. Soldiers hadn't been paid, and foreign creditors were demanding repayment. The states themselves were deeply in debt. Many leaders wanted to default. They argued that the debt was unfair and speculators had bought it cheaply. At this point, paying it off would only enrich the wealthy. Alexander Hamilton saw something different. In his first report on public credit, Hamilton proposed that the federal government assume all state war debts and repay them in full. This decision was explosive, but it achieved three critical things. First, it created trust. Second, it unified the states financially. State debt became federal debt, and their fortunes were now tied together. And third, it created a powerful class of investors who had a direct interest in the survival of the federal government. From the very beginning, debt was not a failure. It was a tool. For the next 150 years, US debt followed a predictable rhythm. It rose during wars and fell afterward. The War of 1812, the Civil War, World War I, each time borrowing surged. And each time, after the crisis passed, the debt was reduced. By the early 1830s, the United States had briefly paid off nearly all of its federal debt entirely. This era gave birth to a powerful myth that America is actually responsible, debt is temporary, and discipline is the norm. But that myth ignores a crucial reality. At the time, the federal government was very small. There were no entitlement programs, no social security, no Medicare, no permanent military-industrial complex. There was basically no expectation that Washington would step in when the economy collapsed. That world ended in 1929, when the Great Depression hit. The old rules failed completely. Balanced budgets didn't restore confidence. They made things worse. Cutting spending deepened unemployment, and allowing banks to fail destroyed savings. Between 1929 and 1933, US GDP collapsed by nearly 30%. Unemployment reached roughly 25%. This is when a radical idea entered mainstream policy. John Maynard argued that during economic downturns, governments should spend, even if it meant borrowing. Because when everyone else cuts back, someone has to keep money moving. Debt stopped being an emergency measure. Instead, it became a stabilizer. Programs like Social Security permanently expanded federal obligations. The government was no longer just a referee, it was a participant. Then came World War II. To fight a global war, the US government borrowed on a scale never seen before. By 1946, federal debt exceeded 119% of GDP. And yet, the feared collapse never came. There was no default, no hyperinflation, no economic ruin. Instead, the post-war economy boomed. Strong growth, high taxes, and controlled interest rates caused the debt to GDP ratio to fall for decades. Policymakers learned a lesson they would never forget. Debt doesn't matter as much if the economy grows faster than the borrowing. That belief became doctrine. In 1971, something even more important happened. The United States ended the gold standard. President Richard Nixon announced that the dollar would no longer be convertible into gold. From that moment on, the US dollar became a purely fiat currency. This changed everything. The government no longer needed gold to back its spending. It could issue debt in a currency it controlled. It could always create dollars to meet obligations. The constraint was no longer solvency, it was inflation. And inflation is far easier to justify politically than spending cuts or tax increases. From the 1980s onward, deficits stopped being tied to emergencies. Tax cuts were passed without matching spending cuts, and military spending remained high even in peacetime. The population aged, healthcare costs exploded. According to the CBO, mandatory spending on Social Security and Medicare has grown automatically regardless of political action. Deficits became normal, even during economic expansions. Then came 2008. The global financial system stood on the edge of collapse. Banks failed. Credit froze. Trillions of dollars in wealth evaporated. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Massive bailouts, zero interest rates, and trillions upon trillions in new debt. The system survived, but a precedent was set. Debt was no longer controversial when survival was at stake. In 2020, that precedent became permanent. When COVID hit, Congress authorized trillions of dollars in spending in a matter of weeks. Direct payments to households, loans to businesses, expanded unemployment benefits. The debt surged faster than at any point in US history. And surprisingly, nothing broke. No immediate collapse, no sudden crisis, which sent a powerful signal. Borrowing works, at least in the short term. Today, the debt continues to grow for reasons that have nothing to do with emergencies. Interest payments compound automatically, entitlements expand by law, political incentives reward spending now and paying later, and global investors still demand US Treasury bonds as the safest asset available. No single person controls this process. No single vote caused it. Everyone acts rationally. The outcome looks irrational. This is not a ticking time bomb. It's something more dangerous, a slow-moving constraint. The national debt is a record of choices. Growth over caution, the present over the future. It's the same thing everyone seems to be doing in today's world. Temporary pleasures, cheap dopamine hits, and immediate distraction over the painful and long path of real growth. The US didn't wake up one day and find itself $40 trillion in debt. It walked there, one decision at a time, because every alternative was more painful in the moment. Similarly, one day you'll wake up and realize you're 50 years old. You'll be left wondering, how did I end up here? Where did all my time go? What went wrong? Because let's be real, time isn't stopping for any one of us. So the real question you need to ask yourself isn't whether the US can pay off its debt or whatever, but can you take back control of your life and shape a future that's genuinely worth living for?